Hi, good morning, everyone. Good evening, where you are calling us from. This is Dalal, and I'm a GMAT Club moderator and incoming MBA, MS, so the MMM program at Kellogg student. Maria is here with us. I am so excited because she's one of our most highly requested guests, and like at the GMAT Club, people always ask for Maria. They want webinars with Maria. So we brought her to you
Thanks for
today.
having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you. It is an honor. Maria has helped thousands of people with her company, ApplicantLab. I'm going to hand her the mic to introduce herself. Hi, Maria.
Hi, Dalal. So for everyone who doesn't know me, good morning. I am the founder of ApplicantLab.com. So if you need admissions advice from an expert, I am entering my 19th year of helping people get into business school. I am a 2005 graduate of Harvard Business School. And instead of starting my own high-end, expensive admissions consulting firm, I decided to instead take all of my knowledge on my almost 20 years of admissions advice and put it into an online platform that you can access 24/7 at an affordable price. You can use it by itself. You can hire folks on my team to help you alongside it, or you can use it in conjunction with some other admissions consultant if you just sort of want to get a second opinion or a gut check on the advice you might be getting elsewhere. So there's so many different ways to use the lab, but no matter how you plan on applying, please do check it out. And I'm excited today to go through the HBS application.
Yes, I am excited too. Wow, what an intro, Maria. You've done so much. You're an inspiration to many. I keep telling you this. So I'm so excited to be here with you. Just have to start the morning.
I should have you just come over to my house every day.
I know. Like a morning full of compliments and beauty and just all of that. Okay, great. So today our goal is to walk you through the HBS application. We thought this would be a great webinar that is going to help so many of you that are right now writing their application and wanting last minute help. And we are going to walk you through the application. What we are not going to do today is review essays, review goals, review all of that. You know, you can go on ApplicantLab, just kind of take a look at ApplicantLab, maybe request Maria's help, or seek other resources that are, good for you, work for you. But today we are going to be focused on just walking you through the application of HBS and answering some generic questions. We're going to answer any questions you might have if we have time at the end of the webinar. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen. And of course, we're going to start the application. This is giving me a little bit of PTSD kind of thing. I don't know if it is to you, Maria. Maybe
no, it's a very friendly application.
Of course it is. You got in, of course. Okay, great, guys. So first things first here. So I'm going to share some of my tips and tricks. And of course, the expert Maria is going to share hers as well. This conversation hopefully is going to be 80% Maria and 20% me. That's what I'm hoping for. So first things first, Maria, I want to ask you, what do you think about like starting the application with your work email versus your personal email, whether it is Gmail or Yahoo, Hotmail, whatever email service you use?
Sure, absolutely. So I think that for your application, you should use a personal email because who knows what will happen, right? If some version of mutant monkeypox makes the world shut down again, you don't know if you're going to be at that job a month from now, 3 months from now, right? So to the extent that from the time you hit submit to the time the decisions are rendered is usually about a 3, maybe 4-month process. Just in case, you might as well use your own personal email address. So that way, no matter what happens with your work email, you can access it. Now, a quick side note, it's important for your recommenders to have, if possible, their work email address because that helps the admissions committee verify their identity and that it's not just like your cousin pretending to be a vice president at your bank.
Absolutely. I agree with Maria. I agree with you because there's also the possibility of the application email going into your spam, right? So like you want to make sure that you use your personal email. I think in the beginning when I first started filling out my application, I used my work email because I thought it would make me look fancier. And I can't tell you how many times people actually thought that if you put your work email, right, it would make you look a lot better to the outcome. Don't worry about that. The outcome is not really concerned about that. As long as you can receive emails and log into your application, then we're good to go. So that's the first thing that we want to highlight. Of course, with HBS, and Maria, you can speak about that. We have 2 rounds that are coming up. Maria, did Harvard before have 3 rounds like years ago?
Yes, for many years, Harvard, as many other schools, had 3 rounds.
Okay.
But they eliminated the 3rd round for the sort of typical admissions because, the 3rd round is kind of in the March, April timeframe. And so really by that point, given that HBS has such a high yield, and by that I mean the number of people who are offered spots, about 90% of them take those spots. So
Right.
some other schools might have a 3rd round to kind of fill out the class if they make offers in round 1 and round 2, and then there are a few spots left over, or a few people that we thought would come aren't going to come, and they might need a couple of extra people to kind of fill things in. That's why round 3 exists. But since HBS has such a robust wait list, and they have people on the wait list that they have a pretty good chance. So, they're like, okay, we're pretty sure that if we offer this person this spot, they're going to take it. So
Yeah.
because of that, they don't need a round 3 in terms of
Okay.
trying to fill the upcoming August class. So you do have to get that application in by early January if you want to be considered for the next August start.
Right. Okay, wonderful. So let's start with the application here. So of course you can access it through apply.hbs.edu. I believe it's apply after that. So the instructions over here, very self-explanatory over here. So your name, right? You don't have to fill up everything here. You don't have to, if you don't have a middle name, right? So these are kind of optional as long as you can give the basic information, I believe, of your first name, your last name over here, of course, your permanent email address, your mailing email address. So Maria, your permanent email address can be your mailing address, right? So, and it can also be different, correct?
Sure. So the permanent address is basically, I mean, honestly, the safest thing to do is it could be your parents' house.
Yeah.
It's basically like if for whatever reason you have to move or you decide to go on vacation, like where's a place where we know we can mail you something that you will definitely receive.
Absolutely.
So, but it can also be your current address. Like don't overthink it. It's
Right. Okay, so where do you currently reside? Right. So this is, I guess, maybe this is kind of just to give them an idea of where you are right now as you're filling out the application. Of course, your geographic background here is, as you can see, where you grew up, right? So for me, for example, I was in France and Toulouse. For you, it could be the same country you're born in, right? It's not really a big deal. You don't have to put something different. You don't have to make up anything over here. I think the additional context here, what do you think we should add here, Maria, in the additional context? And what do you think the outcome is trying to get out of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, one of the things about HBS is that they're not trying to like fool anyone with anything. Like they are pretty straightforward. And so when they say they want additional context, it's literally like, okay, so that we can try to picture roughly the circumstances under which you grew up. So if
Right.
you were in the military and you moved around every 2 years, someone who has that kind of childhood might have a slightly different childhood than someone who, was born and raised in Connecticut. And so I don't think you don't have to like you don't feel like you have to put something in here. If you were born in Milwaukee and you were raised in Milwaukee and you went to like, don't say like I was, you don't have to go into this whole story. You don't have to fill
Right.
out this box. Um, if
Yes.
there's nothing that really needs explaining. But in your case, for example, you have I believe that you have one citizenship, but then you grew up in France, but then you moved to the States. And so I think that that's the sort of thing that like it might not necessarily fit on a resume per se,
Yes.
and I also think, frankly, that they're sick of reading, at my take on this also, that they're sick of reading essays where people spend like 300 words in the essay being like, I was born in this country and then I moved to France when I was 3. Like they don't want that in the essay. And so I
Yes.
almost kind of, if I were them, I would put this little box here to be like, okay, guys, like please don't go into the whole childhood and I grew up on a farm and wherever. Like put that here and save
That's
the essay for more
that's
substantial things.
That's a very good point. I never thought that maybe they added this box because they're kind of sick of reading these essays of like, hey, I was born here, I grew up here, I did this, right? Because that could definitely take away a lot of words from the essay, right? And the essence of what the essay is asking you about. Not that this is not something that you want the outcome to know about you, but it could be added somewhere else, right? And this is the right box for it. Okay, oops. Okay, so see. Okay, so your email address, of course, your phone number, your bio information over here, your citizenship, legal gender, right? If there's anything in here that you want to add, Maria, feel free to do so.
Yeah,
Just hop in.
there's one, we just scrolled past one about your ethnic, racial, and ethnic, racial, and cultural identity. Again,
Yes.
this is another one where don't feel like you have to put it in, especially if you are from, wherever you're from, if you're from like the majority identity from that country, right? So if you are from a certain country that is majority X religion and Y race, you don't have to say, I'm from that. You don't really have to go out of your way to explain that. I think this is, again, more to understand, were you perhaps the child of immigrants, or what were your parents, did your parents have a certain identity or religion that you followed that in some way impacted you in a way that
Yes.
might not be expected.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think, again, just don't feel like, oh my God, there's an empty box and I feel compelled to fill out the empty box because it's empty. Like this is more for people who have slightly, less conventional backgrounds. This gives them an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to explain that.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, that's really good over here. So again, indicate your fluency in languages other than English, right? So this is really important. So we're not adding English here, right? So we're adding any other languages that you're fluent in. Okay, let's continue.
And
Okay,
by the way,
so
be sure not to overstate that, right? Because I think sometimes my two biggest pieces of advice for any application are tell the truth and read the instructions. So, don't put something like I'm fluent in Spanish, and then, because you never know if your HBS interviewer is also fluent in Spanish, and you never know if they're going to jump
oh
into
yeah,
Spanish in the middle of the interview. So I know
oh
I think some people have a very understandable intuition to try to exaggerate certain skills that they
yeah,
have, but you know,
yeah.
I think my interviewer actually switched into Spanish during part of my HBS interview because he was from Latin America. So thank God I actually was fluent. But if you're not, don't resist the temptation to puff that up, as it were.
Yeah, so funny story, Maria. My cousins are half Swedish, and I grew up with them, so I learned a few words in Swedish, and I can't tell you how compelled I felt. I was like, oh my God, this is gonna make me look so global, and so.
Yeah.
I was like, and then I looked at Swedish, right? And then I was like, oh, it says beginner, but I only know 3 words. No.
Yeah, that's not. It's slightly it's like less than beginner. So yeah,
Is there pre-beginner, more like pre-pre type of thing? Okay,
exactly.
so yeah, so don't over exaggerate it, right? Knowing a few words does not make you a beginner.
I mean, you never
Okay,
know.
absolutely. The you never know aspect. That would be scary. Oh my God, if my interviewer was like Swedish. Ooh, okay. All right. So your app fee waivers over here. So this is actually a really cool section here. So of course, if you have previously participated in the Summer Venture and Management Program, Maria, do you have anything to say about that program?
No, just that, not a lot of people in the applicant pool have gone through it. So don't,
Okay.
if you were in it, you know that you were in it. And if you weren't in it, then don't worry about it.
I know when I first saw it, I was like, I don't know what that is. Did I miss out on
No,
anything? Did
you did
I?
not.
Okay.
It
Okay,
is a very
great. So
targeted program, and yeah, don't worry about it. Just
yeah.
move
Okay.
on.
So the military fee waiver, of course, and then we have the need-based fee waiver. So for the need-based, I like that Harvard has that section over here. If you want to apply for the need-based, and maybe Maria, do you want to say something about that over here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually I don't know what the sort of cutoff is for them, right? Because you might think, well, I don't make a lot of money, therefore, I should automatically get a waiver. But there's a lot of other extenuating circumstances. You might make a lot of money, but maybe you are paying for your younger siblings to go to college. So
Right.
I think just sort of answer this honestly. So if you genuinely think like, oh gosh, this, $250 is really, whew, that's a lot of money for me and I might not be able to pay rent because of it, I might not be able to eat because of it, then definitely apply. But if you're like, whatever, I work in private equity and I'm just trying to get something for free, I actually personally think it might backfire if if it's like, come on, you don't really need this waiver. Like, I would be grumpy if somebody
Yes,
tried to say that they needed a waiver and they didn't. So, fill
I
it out,
agree.
but yeah.
Yeah, just be honest about it, right? If you absolutely, and maybe a good way to do this, if you're not sure, maybe just ask them, right? Send them an email and ask them. So that's always a good thing to do, ask questions. Okay, of course, your family over here. So we're looking to learn more about your family background. Harvard's looking to learn more about your family background. If your parents are educated, if they're not, where you come from, right? Your guardians. I think here also, it's really important if you have siblings to put their ages, and then like the format is actually right here. So for me, for example, like it was like 32, right? 40, those are my siblings, right? So something like that. And then, of course, if you're a first generation college student, I'm pretty sure, Maria, you have something to say about this in this box right here. So go ahead.
Yeah, so my interpretation of this particular box, the way that this box is different from the previous boxes, how is this box different from all other boxes? This box is different because for me, this is mostly about financial circumstances growing up. So if you are a first generation college student, that's good for me as an admissions reader to know, because I know that then when you got to college, you probably faced a lot of hurdles that someone who had college educated parents didn't. And so I think if you have any extenuating circumstances that were not covered previously, like by your ethnicity or by the place you grew up, this could be the place to say, for example, if you were raised by a single parent, or maybe your parents were incarcerated and so you were raised by a grandparent, or maybe you have a younger sibling with significant special needs, and so your family, that really impacted how you grew up. I would sort of talk about that, and I would make this about situations where that caused challenges.
Right.
I would not make this about like, my family likes to go to the beach every summer and we have a tradition where every summer we go and we like, no, this is not about just anything about your family background. I believe that the spirit of this question is to find out if you did have sort of uncommon extenuating circumstances growing up.
Yes, that's a very good point. Mentioning that you came from a background where your parents didn't go to college. I mean, I know that my grandma, in this case, not my parent, but she was a guardian for a while. She doesn't read and write, right? I mean, it's just her generation, right? So something like that, right? So mentioning things like that, of course, and they're important to the outcome for sure. Okay, just to get to know you and your family background, and really seeing how motivated you are, right? How motivated you are, and who inspired you and influenced your decisions and all of that. So I think that's very interesting to know. Okay, so the resume, of course, we're not going to go into details about the resume, but we're just the general idea. I know, Maria, you and I, we were discussing something about 1 to 2 pages. I'm a fan of the 1-page resume, and maybe you could talk a little bit about maybe a case where students have to write 2 pages or a page and a half, maybe. Or
that's a hard sell for me, because I don't think anyone needs a page and a half. I mean, my husband has like 25 years of experience, and I think maybe his resume right now might be going over a page. But I think if you can't fit it all into a page, then you're probably not doing something right. Especially if you're the typical HBS applicant and you've got 4 to 6 years of work experience. Like, trust me, you can fit it on a 1-page. A lot of what HBS is trying to get at with the essays, with the entire application, one of the things they're trying to understand is how good are you at identifying what is the most vital information to share. And when you think about their pedagogy, it makes sense because it's a case method classroom. And in the case classroom, you raise your hand and you get called on maybe once every 3 classes to make 1 comment. So that comment better be good. It better be something that really drives the conversation forward, and it should ideally be an insightful thing to say. So if you can't pull out the key aspects of your background and fit them onto 1 page, then it's not like sometimes people are like, but then won't I look less impressive if I only have 1 page versus 2? And I'm like, no, you look more impressive because it's like, you know how to identify what are the key things to talk about and what are the key things to leave off. And just as a heads up, GMAT Club, I know those of you who have been following the GMAT Club YouTube channel for a while, I do have a resume webinar workshop that is available. So I'm sure we can put that, the link to that somewhere. So if you guys want to go and look at that real quick afterwards, check it out.
Yeah, maybe Nikhil and Abhijit, maybe you guys can like pull up that and just put it here for everyone who's watching, because I know you shared a lot of information on it. So of course, I think so you brought up some really good points here, right? So being very selective on what to share is really important. Of course, focusing on your achievements and not your responsibilities and the impact that you had is really important. And you know, making it one page. And then I think here for the minimum work experience, Harvard says it over here, we're looking for applicants to have at least 2 years of full-time work experience, right? So after your undergrad. What would you say, Maria, would be so I have an answer to this, but I want to hear yours, of course. So what would you say would be like the year where you're like, okay, like I have 10 years of work experience. Should I apply to Harvard? Should I not? What do you think for people who think that way?
So, I mean, I think it ultimately comes down to where have you been and what are you looking to get out of the program? So for some people, applying and going to their MBA program after 10 years of experience is the right thing to do. Perhaps they spent 10 of those years in the military and now their time in the military is done and they need to transition to the private sector, and the MBA is a great way to accelerate that transition. That could be fantastic. Or sometimes in some countries, for example, there are occasionally people like I've worked with people primarily from Asia who their company is sponsoring them to come and get the MBA. And the company itself is like, we're not going to do it until you have reached a certain level of seniority or until you have proven to us that you are going to be a leader, a future leader for our company. And then we will pay for your MBA, but first you have to prove yourself. And so sometimes you can't do that in the first 4 to 6 years. Sometimes you need to be a little bit older. So I do think, though, that if you are at more than 10 years of experience, the questions then become, if you want to get a job in a very demanding post-MBA role like banking or consulting, maybe someone who's 23 years old is fine with working 100 hours a week and not talking back and not demanding a life and not demanding sleep, but a 33-year-old is far less likely to put up with that. So, what are your goals? If your goals are realistic, then that makes sense. I think a challenge that sometimes happens with people who are, say, 10 years out of college, who have 10 years of experience. Again, it's more about the years of experience that you have and not how old you are chronologically. But so if somebody has more than 10 years of experience and they're at, say, sort of a manager level, and someone has 4 years of experience and they're at the manager level, the person with 4 years of experience, they might say like, well, why haven't you, person with 10 years of experience, why haven't you accomplished more in these 10 years? Because especially HBS is looking for high flyers. And so, if somebody has been working for 10 years and they really are only at a position that other people are at after 4 years, it's probably a good sign that you're not competitive, not because of the number of years, but simply because of the trajectory and, that level of acceleration within your career.
Right. Absolutely. It needs to make sense. You have to, like, the story needs to flow in a way that it explains why it matters to get an MBA right now. Why right now, right? Like, you say it in a way in the entire application, that they understand that it makes sense for you to actually get an MBA right now. Okay. So, great. So thank you, Maria. So of course, upload it as a PDF over here. We're going to try to go a little faster. I just realized it's 8:30. Okay. So for the employment, I know that we have a thing or two to say about this section. So Maria, I'll give you the mic if you want to go, if you want to start it off.
Yeah, sure. So this section is really important for every business school, but it is especially super duper mega important for HBS. Yes. And the reason for that isn't because like HBS so much is obsessed with your work experience, which they are, but it is because if we think about the HBS essay, the essay is, what else do we need to know about you in order to assess your candidacy? And so when you think about it, what you should do, and I know that we're running this a few days before the next upcoming deadline, so hopefully you've already done this. But what you should really do when you're approaching the HBS application and what I teach in ApplicantLab is to fill out these forms first, because this employment section, if we scroll down a little bit after you get past the sort of normal stuff like what's your salary and what's the address of your, it's like, okay, what are your key accomplishments? The key ones here are the key accomplishments and the most significant challenge. So that's where you can add a narrative background to some of the bullet points on your resume. And so, for example, the resume might say something like, I led a team of 5 to launch a new $10 million product. Great. Do not copy what's in your resume and just copy and paste it in here. Yes, if they just wanted to read the resume again, they wouldn't ask for this box. Yeah. Right? Like absolutely. That's why would they want to read the same sentence twice? So yes. In this box is where you've got, it's not a lot of space, but you have some space to provide a little bit more context. And, sometimes people try to game it. They're like, well, what if I should mention something a little bit in that box, but then expand upon it more in the essay. And I'm like, try to get as much as you can into the box. So then that way you can allocate the essay towards other things. So again, think about efficiency of words. So if you've got 250 characters, what's the best allocation of those characters to convey things that are important for them to know? So for example, let's say the bullet point says, I launched a product that made $10 million, but what the bullet point doesn't say was that the VP of marketing tried to derail you because she wanted her staff member to run that project and not you. And so she tried to get you fired. Like something like that, some of that background, it's like, whoa, like on top of the actual launch, you also faced this political challenge, or you had a client that didn't want to do what you said, or things like that. Some of those background details. So this is where you can tell more of the story, and those details will really help convey your leadership.
Okay, so a couple of things just to talk about here is, of course, the reason for leaving. And we touched on that a little bit, Maria, reason for leaving, right? I think this is a really important one because I think a lot of students do not really know what to say here, because I believe that most of the time people leave, most of the time I would say for negative reasons. They had an issue with their boss, they had an issue with the team, maybe they weren't heard, maybe they weren't appreciated, a lot of the. So how do you think we should approach the reason for leaving? I know there's a section about that on ApplicantLab, and I love that section, but let's give just a brief answer to that here.
Yeah, sure. So one of my little quips is that I think on the application, you should never, ever lie. But that doesn't mean that everything you say is 100% of the truth. You don't have to convey all of the truth. And there's a difference. You're like, oh, she's mincing words. It never tell a lie. But at the same time, look, if you were offered a new job that gave you more responsibility or that gave you more international experience and your boss was a jerk, maybe you focus on the opportunities as opposed to the fact that your boss is a jerk. Because the issue with being very honest, and there are ways to convey it, like if it really was a toxic work environment, you can say that. The issue with having just one boss who's a jerk is that then it's like, because you only have the 250 characters, then it's like, well, let's say I left a job because my boss was sexually harassing me. And then it's like, okay, well, if I put that, then it's like, well, Maria, what did you do? Did you go to HR? Did you well, no, but HR reported into him. So even though, like, what was I supposed to do? And so you can't get into that whole story. It's just easier to be like, I was transferred to, I got another job, and just like, let's just leave some of that stuff out of it. Like he was having a midlife crisis and his marriage was unhappy. And so he was hitting, like, no, just don't go into any of that. Just be like, okay, like focus on the positive. And the way I say this for pretty much any kind of negative aspect to your candidacy, if you can find a silver lining to that. So every once in a while, I've worked with people who have said, like, look, you don't come out and say it's a toxic environment, because then it's like, well, why didn't you stay and try to fix it? If your boss is treating you poorly, why didn't you try to change your boss's mind or get a new boss? So, but sometimes it is unavoidable. And so then, what you could say, the silver lining is like, look, it taught me that that's not how I want to run a company. So later on, when I moved to another company and I was running a division, I made sure that I asked everyone for their opinion at the brainstorming meetings, right? Because I had learned how detrimental it is to be in a situation where you're not allowed to give your ideas. So that could be like the silver lining. So just focus on like the positive or what you got out of a situation, even if the situation itself was bad.
Yeah, very good point. My reasoning for leaving one of the companies that I worked for was that my boss used to micromanage every single minute of every day in my life. And that drove me insane. And that just like kind of just, made me less creative and less focused at work. And I was always like tense. And, so I wrote actually that I left because I wanted to start my own company. And that was part of the truth. But again, we're not lying, but we're not sharing the entire story. And I kind of like tried to find the positive aspect of that. So, so yes, there are different ways to approach that. Of course, in your website, on your website, ApplicantLab, there's very specific ways to answer every single reason for leaving. And I'm so not advertising it right now, right? You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Okay. Maria, I love you. Okay, so a couple questions before we move on, because we're getting close here, but just really to kind of, because it's around the employment and resume section. So someone asked, hi Maria, is Harvard fixated on 4 or 5 years of experience? I believe we answered that. What about someone who has worked for only 2 years, but in tech startups and had an accelerated career where they led teams?
So I think that's great. I think it's not about, again, the years of experience. It's about how much you've accomplished. So it's possible that people out there who have accomplished as much as someone in 2 years as other people have done in 6. Right. So when somebody is applying at the 2-year mark, unless they're coming from a very standard, like sometimes there are certain career paths like management consulting where it's just like a given, like, yeah, after 2 years, everyone goes to business school and that's just how we do it here. But if you're not from that situation, then you just have to realize that your accomplishments and your impact, I mean, in other words, how much you've moved the needle either in your industry or in your company or whatever, that is going to be judged against people who do have 5 years of experience. So oftentimes people with 2 years of experience apply and they don't get in. And then they get really depressed. And I'm like, but they're not saying no, never. They're just saying not yet. And so you might be on the path where 4 years, at the 4-year mark, you're going to be a super competitive candidate because you're on that trajectory, but just you haven't quite gotten to that point yet. So somebody who has been in startups for 2 years and has had significant management experience and has really helped shape, it helps a lot if the startup is doing really well, and it helps a lot if you really helped launch a certain important division. Like the bigger that impact, the better it is for you. Right. But if you're just like 2 years out and you're like, yeah, I'm in sort of like a management rotation program at Eli Lilly or whatever, and I don't know. This is why I talk to people about finding their resume twins. So if you are in something like a management rotation program and no one else from that management rotation program has gotten into HBS at the 2-year mark, it's a pretty good sign to you that maybe you need to get a little bit more experience first.
Yes, absolutely. Another question here is, I'm not very clear on what this question is trying to say, but it says, can I mention different points in accomplishments than the ones on the resume? Instead of providing context to the points on the resume, can I add new information showing more impact than the resume covered?
Sure, you could do that, but I don't know why you would. I mean, the resume is supposed to be your greatest hits.
Yes.
So why would you put something that's more impactful? Why would you not put that on the resume, but put it here? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like the resume is usually the first document at any school that's read, usually, absolutely, not always. And so like, absolutely, and that's also the document that, most business schools, when they're looking at it, when they look at your resume, they're also looking at it from the lens of like, how are our recruiters, the corporate recruiters who come to campus, how are they going to judge this person when they see this resume 8 months from now? And so I don't know why that's exactly the sort of, I think earlier I talked about like people sometimes try to game the system in weird ways. That seems to me like an example of someone who's trying to like Jedi mind trick, like, well, if I put the bigger accomplishment in the accomplishments box, I won't put it on the resume. Like why? But if it's a big accomplishment, it should go on the resume.
Right. Yeah. Don't let that word fool you. Key accomplishments, right? I think that the most important accomplishments should be on your resume, because that's exactly the first impression that you're making, right? That's what makes them kind of be like, okay, this is a very interesting applicant. I'm going to read their application, kind of go over their application. Maria, just one last thing. Do you think over here we should mention anything about, like jobs that we had before our undergrad, for example, do we think we should, no. Okay. So it should be post. undergrad?
Yeah, so HBS actually they limit you to 3 employers. You can only
Okay.
list 3 employers.
Mm-hmm,
Now, if
mm-hmm,
you've had multiple jobs within one employer, you can count that. So let's say you were in the military for 5 years. You
mm-hmm.
could just say, I was in the military for 5 years, and then you have one employer. Or
Right,
if you've had 3 different roles within the military, if you've had 5 different roles within the military, you could treat the last 3, each one, as a separate employer. So they used to say, if you've been at the same organization, you have to list it as just one organization.
right.
Now they've gotten more like, because they understand that sometimes people start as engineers and then they jump to marketing and then they jump to finance.
Yes.
And so that now that they're giving you more leeway, but even if you are a recent college graduate, nothing that you've done prior to college, I can't imagine that, unless you were like starting PayPal when you were a sophomore in high school. Like I
Hey,
can't.
I did. You're hurting me.
I
I
know.
did.
I'm sorry. Well,
I started a little PayPal. I don't know, maybe.
there you go. That's why you got into the MMM program, the
Don't know.
mega
Okay.
competitive.
Well, that's why I'm 35 right now and I'm just starting school right now. I mean, it made sense after all these years. Cheers to that.
Everyone's got a different path, man. Everyone's got a
Right.
different path.
Okay, so a couple of important things over here. And so for Maria to have her tea break right here, or coffee break, I'm I'm going to take the mic for a minute. So very important, because I fell into that trap and mistake and I hated my life after it every time, because listen, guys, this is going to take a minute for you to write. So maybe the best way to do this is to do it on a Word document and then copy paste here, because guess what's going to happen if you stay in this window, like, and you're just like writing, and you're like, okay, I need 2 hours to write this. And then guess what? If you move next, it's not going to save. Okay, so what you want to do is constantly, so over here, it actually says it, save all the time, the work that you do, because you could lose it and there is absolutely no way to go back to it. Okay. Someone at Harvard needs to figure that one out. You know what? Tell your people, Maria.
I will. You guys need to get on it, you slackers.
Yeah.
Now, I can tell you, as a tech entrepreneur myself, that's really hard. That's hard to do. It's a hard balance to strike between,
Okay.
like, for security purposes, do you log people out? But then if you never log them
Right.
out, then if
Right.
you do log them out, then they lose their work. And I have a lot of empathy for the poor IT person at HBS who is
Okay. Just one last important thing here is, of course, always mention the accurate numbers over here. There are verification services after you get into Harvard that verify everything. So make sure that you don't over exaggerate or, say anything over here. If you make a certain amount and it doesn't make you look fancy or anything, especially with like people who have backgrounds in entrepreneurship, we don't really expect you to pay yourself a really high salary if you're doing, if you're working, it's your own company and things like that. Pretty sure, Maria, you can probably speak about that a little bit because you're an entrepreneur yourself, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The salary, and I think they even say this. And again, this is one of those things where people try to voodoo and psych themselves out and think about
Yes.
Jedi mind tricks. Like, well, if I put, if I put my real salary, but like, what if they think it's too low? What if they think it's too high? If my
Yes.
salary's too high, why do I need an MBA? And it's just like
Yes.
people try to psych themselves out, and it's not even. The most useful thing about the salary is, if applicable, if you've had like a jump in it. So if you started at an employer making X and now you're making 2X or 3X, that's kind of an interesting thing for someone to know. Or if you're from a very overrepresented group, right? So if you are like, if there's like 100, people from General Electric applying, just to make something up, and or Exxon or something, right? And some of the people are like at the $40,000 a year level and some are at the $150,000. It's not that that's going to make a difference, but it does give an indication to the admissions reader of like how much the company values this person.
Right.
But that it's certainly not like, it's not as important. It's not important enough for you to try to like do some sort of voodoo with it and be like, well, no, next year, Maria, I'm going to get a raise. And so should I put my next year's salary? No. Answer the question. What's your current year's salary?
Answer the question. Absolutely. Answer the question. And as an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur myself, if you don't have a website for the company, it's okay. As long as you can. I actually had a friend and a client as well who got into Harvard, and when she got into Harvard, her company, her startup didn't have a website, but she was able to prove that it's a startup and it made money and all of that. And of course, there are ways that, and HBS is very much aware of that. There are ways that they're going to ask you for information to verify that this is actually a startup, legit startup. Okay, moving on really quickly here.
Yeah, but this is the most important. I mean, this was one of the most important sections, so it's good that we spent time on it.
Okay, justifiable. Okay. Really quickly, Maria here, I actually forgot to mention something. What do you do if you work remotely? What do you add in here? Your company location? Would you do that?
I would put where you are physically located.
Okay.
Now, what you could do is, like, for example, on the resume, you could say like, oh, we're based in North Carolina. And then, and the other way to do it is also with your mailing address. You could also convey that through your mailing address. So if you're living in Chicago, but your company is based in North Carolina, that's another way to get that across.
Right. I did that on my resume. I think I said remote, and then I put / and then I put the location of the company. But I put remote. I said remote,
That's perfectly fine too.
Yeah. Okay, great. Post MBA goals, my favorite part that I believe makes or breaks your application. What do you think, Maria?
So I think for HBS, I think HBS and MIT are not as interested in your goals as other schools are. And part of that hint is that, well, they only give you 500 characters to talk about your goals. That's only twice as much as the little boxes you've had above to talk about your accomplishments at work.
Yes.
And the reason for that is that, these schools, first of all, about 75 to 80% of MBA students change their minds about what they want to do with their careers once they get to school.
Right.
So what's the point? I've always been so kind of a little irritated by this. Is like, what's the point of having me come up with an exercise in make believe, where it's like it's about my imagination and like, oh, I'm gonna run a media company one day. Like, I guess, but then I got to HBS and I was like, oh, wait a minute, I love entrepreneurship, I love technology. Yep. Shoot, right? So I ended up, and I intended to do what I actually meant what I said in my essays. And then I got there and I was like, whoa, there's a whole world out there that I never even dreamt of, right? So I have so many stories about someone who like goes as a consumer packaged goods marketer, and then is like, real estate's amazing. So the part of the goals always irritates me, because even people who intend to do what they say in their essays end up changing. Yes. So for a lot of these schools, it's more about, the application is more about using past as a preface to future. So if you say, well, I haven't really done a whole lot with my life yet, but if I get that Harvard MBA, then I'm going to go and run the World Bank. Who cares? Like, if you don't have the track record, it's more about your track record, having that evidence to show that you're a certain person. So the application for HBS, and also I really respect MIT for this as well, it is more backwards facing, more historic facing, as opposed to forward facing. So yeah, look, you have to have career aspirations that make sense. You have to have career aspirations. You can't say, if you're like a Teach for America teacher, you can't say, well, I want to go work for a hedge fund after business school, right? Because it's not going to happen, even at Stanford, at Harvard, at any of these schools. So I think at least at the very minimum, it has to be something that like you can realistically accomplish. And based on that, like, the easiest way to do that is to pick something that it flows naturally from where you've been in your career, right? If you've been an investment banker for 5 years, don't say, oh, I'm going to start a nonprofit to help the whales. Like, you've never done anything with whales before, or like, I don't believe it. So make it something where I look at it and I'm like, okay, I believe that this is what you want to do. Also, don't completely BS. It has to be believable. And don't completely BS, because should you get to the interview, one of my favorite things to do in my mock interviews for HBS is to be like, oh, so you say that you want to start an organization that will save the whales. So how many whales are there per year that need saving? And, do you actually know what you're talking about?
That's evil.
No, it's not. It's not. If you write that your career aspiration is to save the whales and teach whales how to read, a very legitimate question is, how many illiterate whales are there out there? Like, otherwise you're just trying to BS me. So
Right. So
anyway.
genuine, sincere, believable. I think a very good way to do this if you have no idea, and I know a lot of people actually have no idea sometimes and they want inspiration, is to look at the employment report, right? Look at the employment report, look at the companies, and just look at like the numbers, right? How many students go to that industry, whatever. And maybe that's going to give you a little bit of aspirations and inspire you to actually see where you want to go. I know that there are schools right now that actually say, if you don't know, like say you don't know, I think it's like a Johnson or something like that. I don't remember. And then they actually give you two options or something because they're aware that people change, right? After the growth and the exposure. Okay. Great point here. I know we have 10 more minutes. So for the education section, I know that a lot of you come from backgrounds where you are from a different country with the GPAs and the transferring the GPA or whatever. What do you think we should do about that, Maria? I think maybe reach out to the AdCom and ask them, or how do we approach, GPA differences and like converting that and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they usually tell you, this is a case where different schools have very different situations, right? So, I think HBS, they don't want you, if like, let's say you went to a school that has a GPA on a 5.0 scale or a 10.0 scale, so if you got like, a 4 out of 5, then okay, that's 80%. So 80% of 4, so that equates to a 3.2. Like they don't want you to do that. They just want you to say whatever your home institution said the
Yes.
GPA was, that's what you do. Just tell us what it
Mhm.
was. And then don't forget, like you're going to upload a copy of your transcript.
Yes.
And that's what's going to matter. In some ways, that's going to matter more than what the actual number is, right? Because someone with like a lower GPA who majored in neurophysical engineering, chemistry, right? Like that person, if that person has like a lower GPA than someone who majored in like communications,
Mhm.
like they're going to look at like the coursework as well. Like if you're like if they're seriously considering your candidacy, they will look at the coursework and say like, did this person
Absolutely.
challenge themselves? How
Yes.
hard were these classes? That's why I that's one of my least favorite things when on the message boards people are like, I have a 7.6 GPA. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, if
Yes.
you went to IIT, it means something very different than if you went to
Right.
Maria's correspondence school of beauty tips, right? So, it's just like
Is that your next project? Is that what you're doing? Are you
that is
revealing it?
really, people around the world come to me for my beauty tips. So, no, I'm just kidding.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah,
So
so just follow the instructions.
okay, great. So the non-degree coursework I would add here, I would say maybe CFA, CPA, Coursera stuff, right? Like things like that you did over here. Maybe just add that under that. Pell Grant recipient, I think it mentions it over here, what that is. And then of course, the academic, if you were ever on, I think this is academic, just disciplinary. So like if you had, cheated in school, or like if there's like any integrity issues or something like that, and if there's a box to explain that, and they put 600 characters, so they want to know exactly what happened, right? They want to know exactly what happened. So is this kind of a section where you're like, you don't tell the entire truth but you don't lie? What do you think?
I mean, so disciplinary action is oftentimes either on the transcript or somewhere like in a permanent record type of thing.
Probation or something? Mm-hmm.
So if they reach out to, say, the registrar of your school and say, like, well, was this person held back, or was this person, made to take a semester off because they didn't do well one semester? I mean, that sort of thing, it's better to. Here's the thing. If you lie about it and they find out later, even if they've already accepted you, even if you've already started classes and you've moved into your little dorm room and you're going to class, if they find out that you lied, they'll kick you out.
Absolutely.
So sometimes people say, well, if I tell them that you know, a common one, unfortunately, a common one is drunk driving, right? If they
Yeah.
find out that I was arrested once, I got pulled over once for drunk driving, they're not going to let me in. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe,
Mm-hmm.
but what's worse, them not letting you in now, or them letting you in and then 6 months after you've enrolled and paid taken out
Absolutely.
the student loan and moved
Right.
and quit your job, and then they're like,
Right.
oh, now this came up, and then they kick you out. Like, it's better to just
Just
know
be honest.
now. Yeah,
Right.
just be honest.
Just be
Because if it
honest
comes
about it.
out
Really.
later, like, ooh,
Yep.
that would be
Yeah,
really
it's not
bad.
good. It's not good. It's not going to look good. Yeah, absolutely. So for the activities over here, I mentioned on my application that I volunteered at a mosque during Ramadan. I mentioned that I was a volunteer at a shelter. I mentioned all these activities that I did. So over here is where you add, if there's anything that you want to talk about here, Maria, go ahead. Otherwise, we'll just move on.
Yeah, I think just be strategic here again with like if the resume talks about volunteering at a mosque, maybe here is where you add some more of that detail about
Absolutely. So
what
what
you
did you
did to
do?
make it.
Right. So for
Right.
me, it was like delivering meals, helping people like, elderly people, things like that. So mention like in details what happened, maybe even the volunteering hours, quantify that a little bit, right? Volunteer
Right.
hours, how many days a week, things like
How
that.
many meals were served? Yeah.
Absolutely. Meals were served. Yes, absolutely. Awards and recognition is where, okay, this is a quick favorite here. Maybe this is not where you mentioned if your mom gave you a little star. We were talking about that, Marie.
Yeah. Yeah. I was like, if I won the award for best admissions consultant from my mom, it doesn't mean a whole lot. So don't feel that just because this box is here that you have to like pick any award. Like, oh, when I was 7 years old, I won a color in the, coloring contest at my local mall. No,
Yes.
like please keep in mind like who your competitors are in this process.
Yes. Yes.
So choose,
Yes.
don't just feel like, oh, they give me up to 3 awards, so I have to fill in 3 awards.
Absolutely.
If you've got 5 awards and 4 of them are kind of garbage, like kind of lame, just mention the
Mhm.
one that's impressive.
Yeah, so just a quick example, something maybe like, I did something about like recycled batteries in Kuwait. I won an award for making a song for like COVID, the people who actually helped during COVID, the medical staff and everything. So I won an award in Kuwait for best song, whatever. So I wrote about that, right? So like things that kind of are a little bit on a bigger scale. Okay, the essay. Oh my God, we don't have time. Maria, do we have some time or no?
I
We
mean, I
don't.
think I think the only thing that I would say, yeah, I do have a hard stop in 4 minutes.
Okay.
The only thing I would say about the essay is, again, like I'm not trying to get voodoo Jedi Knight mind trick with you here, but they tell you what they're looking for. They're like,
Yeah.
we have already seen your resume, the little text boxes that you have very strategically filled in.
Mhm.
We've got your recommendations. So what else do we need to know?
Yes.
Note, here's a key thing. Like they've already given you a box to talk about various aspects of your childhood and your environment growing up. So I'm
Absolutely.
not saying like don't talk about the fact that you're Muslim and you worked at the mosque. I'm not saying don't talk about it. I'm just saying
Yes.
be strategic.
Right.
If you can talk about that mosque volunteering somewhere else, or if you can at least provide 80% of the story in those
Mhm.
little boxes, then
Mhm.
save the 20% of the story that you really want to tell them. Save that for the essay. Don't
Right.
repeat it. And also, again, look at the rest of the application for clues. If they wanted to know about certain aspects of your childhood, they already give you opportunities to fill that in.
Yes.
Again,
Yes.
I'm not saying now it's like, oh, Maria said that if I was raised by a single mother, I can't mention it in my essay. And I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like,
Right.
if you talk about it in some place, that means you don't have to repeat it here. The other thing
Yes.
that I would say is notice that they do not ask about your career goals
Yes.
because they give you the 500 characters. You've already had 500 characters to talk about your career goals. That's
Hmm.
all we
Hmm.
need. If they wanted more than 500 characters, they would ask for more than 500 characters. They're not trying to play mind games with you.
Yes. Yes.
If they wanted
Absolutely.
1,000 characters, they would give you 1,000 characters. If they wanted 500 words about your career vision, they would give you five. They give you 500 characters for a reason because they don't really like, they don't super care. And,
Yeah.
that's for the interview anyway. So also do not use any of your 900 words to talk about why HBS.
Yeah, I literally wrote that. I was like, this is not a YHBS essay. So that's very important. And of course, the 900 word limit changed from last year. So just really quickly, emphasis on the word more, something that is not mentioned anywhere in your application, or maybe there's a story behind a bullet point on your resume that you want to kind of elaborate on that might showcase a certain skill set that you think the outcome would be interested in. Of course, there needs to be sincerity and honesty in the entire essay needs to come from the heart, right? So there needs to be a lot of self-reflection, I would say. And of course, always remember that they're humans that are reading your application. You know, they're not robots. So you need to build that kind of connection with them through this essay. That's very important. And it's not a YHBS essay. That's very, very important. I would say here, everything else is just really self-explanatory. Maybe just the last thing that we want to touch on over here is, I think this is a new section that you were talking about, right, Maria?
Yeah, they've asked before if you've applied before to HBS, but now they have a little section, a 250 word section to talk about if you applied in the past and you're applying again now, what's different? Like, what's that delta between who you were then and who you are now?
Okay.
So before, what I would tell people, because before there was no word limit on the essay. So before, I would tell reapplicants, like, maybe in the essay is where you talk about, like, the last time I applied, I thought this, but now I've changed and I've grown. But now they've pulled that out. It's funny because I used to tell people, like, 1,000, 1,100 words is kind of what you want to do, and they've got like 250 words plus 900 words gets to 1,150. So this is where I think you say, like, okay, like, I applied 2 years ago, and back then I wasn't managing people, or I had no international experience, or I had never launched a product before. And now in the past 2 years, I have launched a product and I've been through that. So this is where you really highlight how I'm a better candidate now. That's essentially what they're looking for. I mean, They say, like, oh, reflect about whatever. Yeah, that could be part of it, but it's in part your chance to sort of summarize. And the thing, this is irritating because even if you apply to 2+2 as a college senior, you still have to fill this out, which I think is kind of silly because like what's changed since you applied 5 years ago? Well, I don't know. Look at my resume. So that's a little bit irritating. So if you applied 2+2 and now you're 5 years out, like, don't stress about this part. It's kind of obvious, like, what's changed. But especially if you applied in the last 1 year or 2 years, especially in the last 1 year, this is where you say, like, this is why I think you didn't let me in last year, but I think you should this year. Here's why.
Because
not in a braggy way. Right. Not in a braggy way, but in a, like, here's why I'm a stronger candidate this year. So here's why I'm reapplying. And what I like about this is that it's like they make you think a little bit. Like, I think sometimes people are just like, I didn't get in, so I'm just going to reapply as like a gut reaction, knee-jerk reaction. And it's like, well, how are you better?
Right.
You didn't work before.
Yeah.
And if you're the same candidate now than you were 9 months ago, it probably won't work again unless there's some delta there. So
there's some change. Absolutely. Yes. Maria, I know you have to go. Do we have time to very straightforward 2 questions? Very straightforward. Yes. Okay. Could you please enlighten us in which section should we mention a member who's an HBS alumna? I think that's in the beginning. I'm going to pull that
It's in
up.
family.
Okay.
If they have it, it'll be in family.
Okay. I'll pull it up.
They might not ask.
Okay. All right.
It changes from school to school, and it changes from year to year. So some schools will say, like, do you have a relative who went to this school?
Relative partner right here.
There you go. Oh, there it is.
So over here under supplemental info.
Oh, supplemental info. That's where it is. Okay.
Maria, next question.
Family.
Under awards, does it sound braggy if you say you were mentioned by Forbes?
I think that might be interesting. I mean, if you say I was mentioned by Forbes because I rock and I've never made any mistakes and I'm amazing, that wouldn't be great. But if you're like, hey, my work I did this work, I had this impact, and it was recognized by Forbes,
right?
Then that's a way to convey it where you're getting it across, but you're not like, boom, who's awesome? I'm awesome. Right?
Okay, last question, because we need to let Maria go. Free Maria. Okay, if someone gets an award for consecutive years, does one mention the award as one category, or should it be mentioned as 2 separate awards?
So this is a very strategic question. I would advocate, if you get the same award multiple times, just list it as one award, but then say, I won it 4 years in a row. Because also put yourself in their shoes. You don't want to read, like, I won this award, and then underneath, I won the same award last year, and then underneath, I won that same award 2 years ago. Like, where's the benefit? Where's that marginal benefit of you mentioning it 3 different times?
So the 200 character limit. Okay, excellent. Maria, I want to keep you for longer. I know everyone wants to keep you here for longer, but we can't have you all day, unfortunately. But if you have any last words for anyone here, just you have the mic.
Yeah, I mean, just, for that essay, try to fill out as much as you can about your background elsewhere, so that way you free up the essay as much as possible. And if I said anything during the session that was interesting or enlightening for you, there's more where that came from at ApplicantLab.com. So please do check it out, because that's where I put all my best thinking is there.
Yes.
So thanks for having me. I do
Yes,
have to go, but
absolutely.
best of luck to everyone.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you so much for everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you soon. Bye, Maria. Bye, everyone.